to begin this process, waypoint 0, waypoint 1, and then on to waypoint 2, which we mentioned is about 20 meters away.
Okay, this is where you set down.
Great views there from the International Space Station, looking at the Dragon Grace spacecraft, that strobe light illuminating its path, as well as the port and starboard side lights. The red and green that you see on your screen is both the International Space Station and Dragon Grace in an orbital nighttime period. They're actually crossing over the Pacific Ocean, about to cross over the equator, and then eventually make its way over the west coast of North America. We'll start to see the spacecraft and the International Space Station once again become illuminated with an orbital sunrise. In a few more moments, that'll occur as they continue their journey over the Pacific Ocean. And for the Dragon spacecraft, approaching waypoint 1, now about 15 minutes from that point. And we'll continue to bring those great views as you see that slow and steady progress of the Dragon vehicle as it continues to track down the orbiting laboratory. And on your screen you see the speed and altitude, where it is over the Earth in current relation, but on that far right hand side, that's the thruster firings. And you just see those illuminate every so often as Dragon continues to fine-tune its path towards the International Space Station. And this mission since launch approaching now 1 day, 3 hours, or 3.5 hours of time. That's the time you see in the middle there, the T+. 1 day, 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 40+ seconds. As the crew aboard, anxious and ready to join the Expedition 73 crew aboard the International Space Station. And as we take a look at those crew members and introduce them to you, that'll welcome the Axiom Mission 4 team. They're led by Commander Takuya Onishi of JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, who just recently celebrated about 2 weeks ago his 200 days in space. Anne McLean, NASA Flight Engineer, will be there as well. Her and Nicole Ayers, the two NASA astronauts monitoring Dragon's approach to the International Space Station. For McLean, celebrating 300 days in space last week. And for Nicole Ayers, this past Monday, celebrated 100 days in microgravity. They're also joined by NASA astronaut Johnny Kim, flight engineer, and Roscosmos cosmonauts Kirill Peskov. For Peskov, he would also celebrate 100 days this past Monday as a part of the Crew 10 team. And then Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Ryzhikov and Alexei Zubritsky also joining the cadre of 7 astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the International Space Station. We mentioned earlier this is the 4th private astronaut mission to the International Space Station, and the first since January of 2024 since Axiom Mission 3. From the Axiom Mission 1 now through Axiom Mission 4, the International Space Station will have welcomed 14 different private astronaut crew members representing 111 different nations, and showcasing how these private astronaut missions truly expand access to the space station for more nations, people, and opportunities. And we talked about This crew, in approximately their 2 weeks on board the orbiting laboratory, will participate in around 60 research investigations representing 31 countries, with more than 24 of those experiments sponsored by the ISS National Lab. In about 2 minutes, we'll monitor the loops and keep an ear out for the go, no-go poll on the ground for teams that will be monitoring Dragon's approach to waypoint 1. And that waypoint will be reached in a little less than a dozen minutes, 12 minutes from now. This is Mission Control Houston, as we are continuing to monitor the Dragon Grace spacecraft and Axiom mission 4, the private astronaut mission, as it continues its approach to the International Space Station. They have moved past waypoint 0 and are now on its way to waypoint 1, the second of 3 checkpoints or 3 gates for this journey for the spacecraft to the orbiting laboratory. We just received an update that the new anticipated docking time, approximately 5:30 a.m. Central Time, 6:30 a.m. Eastern, as the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station teams here on the ground, both in Hawthorne, California for SpaceX, and inside of NASA's Mission Control Houston and the International Space Station Flight Control Room, continuing to work together in communication and relay those updated data and projections and trajectory and all the information needed. So again, that docking time has been updated to now approximately 5:30 a.m. Central, 6:30 a.m. Eastern. And the flight control teams here in Houston and listening in on the loops on overall communications have just pulled go for Dragon's approach to waypoint 1, and they will reach that milestone waypoint 1 in about 9 minutes from now. This waypoint will have the spacecraft 220 meters away from the International Space Station, a little more than 656 feet. And once it reaches that docking access, an additional go-no-go pole will be created, in which the teams will then pull for the arrival of the spacecraft to waypoint 2. And given the go there, Dragon Grace will move to within 20 meters and little more than 65 feet from the orbiting laboratory. And earlier we also had communications that if everything goes to plan and Dragon continues to remain on its trajectory, that they would bypass waypoint 1 and go straight from 0 to waypoint 2. But once it arrives to waypoint 1, this will be the point in the spacecraft's journey in which we will be on what we call the docking axis, which will essentially mean that it is directly in front of the docking port that it'll connect itself to. The crew are Right now heading to the space-facing port on the International Space Station, node to zenith of the Harmony module. That zenith meaning it is the side of the space station facing space. So its journey brings it from underneath the International Space Station, Dragon Grace, to swinging up and over top of it, and then arriving at that docking access en route to waypoint 2. We'll continue to bring views of the International Space Station and Dragon Grace spacecraft as we receive them, as the two continuing their chase to connect up as they're now making their way towards the western coast of North America in an orbital nighttime configuration. And we've seen views of the Dragon spacecraft in that orbital nighttime, with the strobe lights shining bright. Once it gets closer, it'll actually illuminate the International Space Station and allow for greater views of the docking port itself that it'll connect to. And again, that node 2 is zenith port of the Harmony module of the space station. And that anticipated docking time that has now recently been updated to 5:30 a.m. Central, 6:30 a.m. Eastern. Teams on the ground have pulled go for our Dragon's approach to waypoint 1, and that arrival to that checkpoint will be a little more than 5 minutes from now. The crew inside Dragon Grace Axiom Mission 4. They are in their launch and entry suits and are ready to continue their journey towards the International Space Station. And there you see it, the view from the orbiting laboratory, looking at Dragon Grace. As you see that strobe light we were just mentioning, as it gets closer, will illuminate the side of the orbiting laboratory, as well as the port and starboard lights, the red and green. Crew in their launch and entry suits, providing that extra layer of protection and pressure, and that happens, are in them during these dynamic phases of flight. Now inside 5 minutes from waypoint 1. When Dragon docks to the International Space Station, there will be 5 spacecraft connected to the orbital outpost, and we'll bring the crew up to 11 crew members, and the overall total of the International Space Station to 288 visitors since 1998. They will join the Dragon Endurance spacecraft that brought up Crew 10 back in March. They will also join with the Soyuz MS-27 spacecraft that brought NASA astronaut Johnny Kim to the International Space Station in early April. And then 2 cargo craft, Progress cargo craft from Roscosmos also aboard the station, and then eventually the Dragon Grace spacecraft, as we get now views inside of Dragon Grace and looking over the shoulders of Commander Peggy Whitson and pilot Shubhanshu Shukla of ISRO. And you see them adjusting their monitors as the approach continues on for Dragon. And then a great view in the middle of the screen there of the path Dragon is taking. Last time we saw inside, it was more towards the left-hand side of the screen, in which Dragon now flying up and over top of the International Space Station. And now we get great views from Dragon Grace, and there's the strobe light. You can see it ever so faintly illuminating the International Space Station as it continues.
Station Houston on the big loop. Dragon is transmitting docking camera video. Please confirm video and data updating in Dragon Docking Monitor. Also, we have a new docking time of 10:30.
Copies. We are seeing data on the Dragon docking monitor, and we copy 10:30 for the new docking time.
Houston copies.
Great communications there on the big loop between the teams in Houston and SpaceX, talking to Dragon Grace and the confirmations of the updated docking time. You heard the word 10:30. That's 10:30 Zulu, which Central Time is 5:30, as we had mentioned, 5:30 a.m. Central, 6:30 a.m. Eastern, as we return to that exciting view from Dragon looking up at the International Space Station. You can ever so faintly see the solar arrays coming into view, and that strobe light illuminating the radiators, which are right along that central portion and angling upward. The International Space Station and the Dragon spacecraft now approaching the west coast of North America, right around the Seattle area, that border between the United States and Canada, as we are approaching 1 minute away from waypoint 1, the second checkpoint and second series of waypoints for the spacecraft to reach to. The teams have already pulled go, but we will listen for the call outs for that waypoint 1 arrival.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue approach to waypoint 2. As a reminder, manual impulsive retreat recovery is not permitted.
And Dragon copies all.
And there you heard communications on the big loop about that soft capture ring, and that is the initial contact that will occur between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station, a soft capture, with that soft capture ring then retracting and the 12 hooks that will drive and connect and form a hard mate between the spacecraft and the International Space Station. From there, power communications will then be connected up, and astronaut Nicole Ayers will make her way into the pressurized mating adapter and get ready for hatch opening procedures, which will require bringing the vestibule, the space between the two hatches, between the International Space Station and Dragon Grace, together. And there we see the orbital sunrise making its way over top of the International Space Station as they continue their pursuit of each other, now angling over at North America. And there in the center screen, if you look at the topmost, the Dragon now perfectly aligned over top of the International Space Station, now looking down at that Node 2 Zenith port, and a great view just off the bottom portion there. That is the Dragon Endurance spacecraft that it'll be just alongside of. So Dragon has reached waypoint 0, and on initial comms earlier that the teams on the ground, once reaching waypoint 1, have been allowed to bypass that waypoint and now move on to waypoint 2, which will be in about 9 minutes from now, and targeting docking in about 14 and a half minutes from there. Go, no-go polls for docking in about 7 minutes as the teams on the ground continuing to monitor Dragon's progress. And once they arrive to waypoint 2, there will be a pause, make sure everything is lined up just perfectly before that final approach and docking. This is Mission Control Houston as Dragon Grace and the spacecraft carrying Axiom Mission 4 and their 4 astronauts continuing their approach to the International Space Station. They have just made their way past waypoint 1, which had them at 220 meters away from the space-facing port of the International Space Station's Harmony module. And now on the path to reach waypoint 2, teams on the ground have concurred or agreed that they will take a brief pause at waypoint 2, which is 20 meters away, to make sure everything is aligned precisely. And there you see the view from Dragon and that newly illuminated International Space Station as the two craft navigating its way over North America, coming into an orbital sunrise and daytime period.
Station on the big loop. Dragon attitude is still as expected, and station is ready for docking.
Houston copies. At waypoint 2, Dragon will briefly pause to align for docking, then automatically resume approach.
Station copies.
Commentator Rob.
You just heard great communications on the big loop from Station and Dragon, as well as the teams in Houston and in Hawthorne for SpaceX and NASA, as the Dragon Grace spacecraft continuing its approach to the International Space Station, carrying Axiom Mission 4 Commander Peggy Whitson, pilot Shubhanshu Shukla of ISRO, Sławomir Uznański-Wiśniewski of ESA,
Dragon
and Tibor.
Soft capture ring extension complete. Dragon will continue through waypoint 2 without a hold.
Second copy, no hold at waypoint 2, and good rating extension.
Great communications there. They were anticipating a brief hold to make sure everything aligns, but Dragon Grace continuing on what has been so far so good. A great rendezvous with the International Space Station. They will proceed to continue past waypoint 2. And you also heard in the communications with NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers, the station ready for docking. And a great view of the SpaceX Dragon Grace spacecraft making its glacial approach to the International Space Station. And the view from the space station looking up as it approaches the space-facing or node 2 zenith port of the Harmony module. We are about 4 minutes away from the waypoint 2 arrival, which again they are expecting to move right past through without a hold. That is at the 20-meter mark, and proceed right on into docking, a soft capture, and then soft capture ring retraction and hooks to drive. And that capture, about
Dragon
8 minutes and
SpaceX
47.
on the big loop. Ground is go for approach 2, and approach is now allowed. Reminder, ensure that visors are closed prior to Dragon's departure from the waypoint. Once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
Dragon copies, and we have visors down, and we are go for docking as well. And copy on the approach. Inside 2, chop.
SpaceX copies, visors down, SpaceX crew is go for docking.
All great communications there as the communications from the ground up to the SpaceX Dragon Grace spacecraft as visors are down on the 4 astronauts inside as they continue their approach to the International Space Station, now nearly 7 minutes away from that initial contact. Dragon and the International Space Station now making its way over the northernmost territories of North America and Canada, and heading towards the Atlantic Ocean as we are now 7.5 minutes away from the approximate docking time as Dragon will move smoothly past waypoint 2, about 20 meters away. And continuing its fine-tuning and approach, you see little plumes coming off the spacecraft. Again, those are those thruster firings continuing to inch and adjust the spacecraft towards the orbiting laboratory. Dragon continuing to get bigger and bigger from the viewpoint of the International Space Station as waypoint 2 about 90 seconds away, and there it'll be just a mere 20 meters away. And there the spacecraft will focus on aligning its docking system with the docking adapter and then fly in to make the initial contact and give us what we will call that soft capture, or the soft capture ring will retract. And then the hooks will drive to form the hard mate. And that capture, or that initial contact, coming in about 6 minutes from now.
Yes, they have it. I can press them. They switch it out.
Approaching 30 seconds away from waypoint 2 arrival, in which the Dragon spacecraft will be about 20 meters away, just called out 30 meters, so continuing its close in to the International Space Station. Dragon Grace now 25 meters away. Dragon has now reached waypoint 2, 20 meters away from the International Space Station, and will continue its approach to the International Space Station. And there you can see a great view of that zenith port, that space-facing port of the International Space Station's Harmony module. As the Dragon spacecraft right now sitting at waypoint 2, just 20 meters away.
Houston Houston Station for Step 4 in Block Bravo. Dragon attitude is as expected.
Houston copies. Station Houston on the Big Loop. Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 and 1.102.
Station copies, monitoring for steps 5 and 6.
And there you heard it. The final steps relayed up to the crew for final approach and docking have been given as we continue to see Dragon Grace spacecraft close the gap between them and the International Space Station. Now, just before the spacecraft reaches the international docking adapter for that soft capture, you'll hear the call-out CHOP, or crew hands-off point, in which Dragon will continue its journey and make that initial connection, that soft capture, in those final few moments.
SpaceX Dragon, 10 meters.
10 meters.
Inside 10 meters, a little less now than 30 feet away, is all that separates Dragon Grace from the International Space Station.
Five meters.
5 meters.
Meters, chop.
2
Houston
meters.
Station, 2 meters, chop.
We have CHOP.
1 meter.
1 meter. Dragon contact and soft capture complete.
Dragon copy.
Dragon Grace and the Axiom Mission 4 crew have arrived to the International Space Station at 5:31 a.m. Central Time over the North Atlantic as the two orbiting around the Earth, connecting with the soft capture ring, and now we'll begin the ring retraction to bring two vehicles closer together, and then the 12 hooks, the two sets of 6
Ring
will drive
retraction
to form
in
a hard
progress.
mate. And there you heard there, the soft capture ring is retracting, and then we'll do so until sensors are indicating it's time for those hooks to drive in place and give us a hard capture and firmly secure Dragon to station. And again, Axiom Mission 4 and its commander Peggy Whitson, pilot Shubhanshu Shukla of ISRO, and mission specialist Sławomir Uznański-Wiśniewski and Tibor Kapu of ESA and Hunor have arrived to the International Space Station with contact at 5:31 a.m. Central, 6:31 a.m. Eastern, as the two were orbiting over the North Atlantic. The soft capture ring, that initial contact between Dragon Grace and the International Space Station, continuing to retract, and we'll await for the calls that the sensors read that it will be time for those 12 hooks on the Dragon to then begin driving and connecting itself to form a hard mate to the International Space Station.
Ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
This is Mission Control Houston, as you are seeing a live view of the recently connected Dragon Grace spacecraft with the Axiom Mission 4 astronauts and Peggy Whitson, Shubhanshu Shukla, Sławomir Uznański-Wiśniewski, and Tibor Kapu arrive to the International Space Station, soft capture and contact at 5:31 a.m. Central Time, 6:31 a.m. Eastern, as the two were orbiting above the North Atlantic. And right now, the two mated with that soft capture, the soft capture ring retracting to pull the spacecraft closer to the International Space Station. And once given the go, the ring, or the hooks around the Dragon nose cone will drive and connect to form a hard mate. Teams on the ground in both Houston.
Station Houston on the big loop. MCS configured, proceeding with hook driving.
Station copies.
And the great call there, that's the next step in this docking procedure, is the driving of the hooks, the 12 hooks surrounding the nose cone or the nose of the Dragon spacecraft. And we'll monitor those. They'll drive in 2 sets of 6. The first set of 6 right now, they're traveling, and we'll continue to follow along as the docking process continues on. And then after that first set of 6, the second set will drive and connect Dragon to form a hard mate to the International Space Station. And once the docking is complete, NASA astronauts Anne McLean and Nicole Ayers, who have been monitoring from the International Space Station from the cupola of the Dragon's arrival, it'll be Ayers that'll begin the hatch opening or hatch operations. And that'll start by opening up the main hatch on the Node 2 Zenith section of the Harmony module. That's what you see Dragon connected to. And what's separating that module and the Dragon spacecraft is that and continuing to monitor that first set of 6 hooks forming that hard mate. And once the full set of 12, Ayers will continue the docking procedures with the leak checks and then begin making its way to the pressurized mating adapter. That's what you see between the Harmony module and the Dragon spacecraft, and access into there to then what we begin pressurizing the vestibule, that small compartment between the 2 hatches. And that vestibule has been exposed to the vacuum of space prior to Dragon Grace's arrival. So the next step is to carefully reintroduce that air and pressure inside so it matches both that of the station and the Dragon spacecraft. And we just received confirmation that the first set of 6 hooks have driven and closed, and we'll now begin the second set of 6 to continue that hard mate between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station. If you are just joining us, this is Mission Control Houston, where Axiom Mission 4 aboard the Dragon Grace spacecraft have connected to the International Space Station at 5:31 a.m. Central Time, currently in the process from soft capture to the hard mate to the orbiting laboratory. First set of 6 hooks have closed, and now monitoring that second set of 6, 12 in total, to form that hard mate.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, hard capture complete.
Dragon copies. Hard capture complete.
And we just heard confirmation there. All 12 hooks have closed, and that is a hard mate to the Dragon Grace spacecraft and the International Space Station, completing from soft capture to that hard mate. And these So the soft capture ring retraction in progress, and then it'll be on to establishing umbilical connections between the spacecraft and the International Space Station. That'll allow for the transfer of communications and power through those umbilicals. So we're Dragon. You see that upper portion that's mostly black against the vacuum of space, but that's the solar arrays to provide Dragon power. Once those umbilicals are connected, that power will then be provided by the International Space Station, and communications will have that hardline connection with the umbilicals as well. And once those umbilicals have been connected, that'll complete the docking process, and that's when NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, namely Ayers, will jump into action and begin the leak checks and hatch opening procedures. And that'll allow the pressurization of the vestibule, the space between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station, to be brought to pressure equal to that of what is inside station and inside the Dragon spacecraft, about 14 psi, what you experience here on Earth as sea level. And then from there, the hatch operations will continue. And the Axiom Mission 4 team will make its way on board the International Space Station with welcome remarks soon to follow. Soft capture ring has now been stowed away, and the umbilicals are in motion again to connect Dragon Grace and the International Space Station, providing that communications, that direct line of communications and power.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, docking sequence complete. Ground will be enabling hardline power and comm connections shortly. You are go to DOF suits per procedure 4.012 and begin post-docking cabin configuration per 4.400 in parallel.
Dragon copy. Docking complete. 4.012 and 4.400 are in work. And Grace is happy to be on Harmony.
And Grace Station, we are excited to welcome you. Peggy, Shug, Suave, and Tibor, we cannot wait to open the hatch and give you guys a hug. We'll see you soon.
Looking forward to it.
And Axiom 4 from Houston, welcome aboard the International Space Station. It's an honor to have you join our outpost of international cooperation and exploration.
We are honored to be here. Thank you.
Very exciting moment for all those aboard.